Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome once again to another live stream. As you can see, I'm joined by the stalwarts of the property quorum, Hamish McClay of Search Convey, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, and of course, Julet Baboolal of Gun & Cook. Here to discuss and mull over the various aspects of change within the property market. And today is no exception. Topic today is climbing a steeper ladder. Where will SDLT reshape the property market? Now, being the educated fool that I am, Hamish, would you please care to explain yourself?
Well, we all know that stamp duty and land tax are one and the same thing. And it's been argued for some years now as to whether that is an appropriate tax to be levying on people just for sort of buying properties. And I think we do actually sort of see that if something like that is unable to keep pace with rising property prices, it does impose upon a significant area of buyers in the marketplace, namely first-time buyers. If we don't up that sort of ladder, so to speak, or we extend the rungs to enable people to get under those rungs to get onto, it does make it harder and harder. And if we're wanting to actually stimulate a market, the last thing we want to do is to stop people from entering that market. And that could potentially be something that's causing a challenge. We're compacting with that. We've got a massive great influx yet again. It does seem to repeat itself. And strangely, people don't sort of want to actually sort of ease that burden on by actually changing it, putting a specific date in there. And we all know what happened the last time round. Do we want to lose more conveyancers as a consequence? Now, interestingly enough, just as before we came on air this morning, I looked at an email which came through from Stuart Title. Many people will be familiar with Stuart Title. They actually sort of apply insurance and offer insurance towards searches and various other aspects within the property sector. And their title is a podcast. I don't know quite what it's coming out from. It says April Fool's Day 2025. Not a laughing matter for home buyers and their conveyancers.
Well, Juliet, I'm going to throw you straight into the fray. What the hell's going on?
Well, obviously, you've got the changes in the stamp duty and the threshold. The zero threshold is going to drop both for first-time buyers and other buyers, and people will go into panic mode. So the reality is, if I can save some money by completing on the 31st of March as opposed to the day after, then I'm going to push my solicitor, push my lawyer to get the deal done beforehand because it saves me some money. Now, I've started to see disclaimers on emails from solicitors, conveyancing solicitors, saying that the stamp duty, I'm just reading it, but the stamp duty rates will change as at the 31st of March 2025, and we cannot guarantee that your matter will complete prior to that rate change. And if not, your stamp duty will increase. And so obviously solicitors are now protecting themselves because you as a consumer or the buyer, the first-time buyer, can't come and say, well, you know, solicitor, you didn't tell me this, and now I'm being bitten. I haven't got the additional money. Because what it does mean is that if some matters don't complete by the 31st of March, they may just abort because people haven't got the balance of monies to fork out for the additional stamp duties, etc. And perhaps that's something that the government needs to look at insofar as, well, hold on a minute, the transaction started in January, and for whatever reason, there's so many factors in a conveyancing transaction that's outside of the buyer's control. They need to look at that. But it means what a lot of solicitors are doing is now covering their backs, because every time something goes awry, people look at, well, whose PI can I claim on? I was surprised, Hamish, because I thought you were going to say Stuart Title came up with an indemnity policy of some sort to sort of bridge that gap, you know, where it may just be a couple of days. It may be a day just after the 31st of March that the completion has to take place. But the way that the rules are structured, if that happens, irrespective, you will pay the higher level.
Sounds like they need to provide danger money. Chris, is this another brouhaha about the stamp duty? I think, are we in Groundhog Day? Didn't we go through this once before?
multiple times, but yeah, it does feel that way. But yeah, the stamp duty land tax it's a racket. Well, let's call it what it is. It really
Chris, would you please speak your mind?
the fact that it's been allowed to exist for such a long time is it needs to be questioned. We seem to have lost the will to keep asking the question why, and the fact that it has existed continued to exist over the last 20 to 30 years, while inflation has run rampant, while it's absolutely decimated the property markets, as well as our cost of living. And then with the latest changes, with the latest government having the audacity to not reduce it but increase it, we have to ask the question, what is this about? Because then if you compare SDLT, stamp duty land tax, to stamp duty that you pay on shares, the difference is stark. You're talking 0.5% on shares as a flat rate. So why the stamp duty, which is the converse, are we paying such massively tapered and significantly stepped up and up the higher that you purchase? Why are we paying these rates on these particular property transactions when there is a few obvious side steps? Firstly, potentially putting properties into companies and just trading on the shares. Well, that instantly sidesteps some of the revenues potential claims against someone. And then there's still all the tax breaks for these corporates, these huge conglomerates that can shift assets across national borders. So why are we paying this in the first place? So that ultimately it boils down to, as an investor, my perspective on this is that actually it's not a tax that I'm going to pay as the buyer. I'm going to pass it on to the seller. So it's a seller's tax. So the seller's being penalised just for selling their property.
Should we call it? It seems to be fashionable. Should we call it a tariff?
Yeah,
let's call it a tariff. I think it's what great artists, Juliet, call willingness suspension of disbelief.
If I hadn't had exposure to other jurisdictions, I would think, oh yeah, this is just the norm. I agree with Chris. It's like, where is our sense of questioning? Because we pay this, and it's like, I have seen it last year, especially, where people were wound up so much, the aggression and the anxiety of getting this over the line. Why would you put your nation in such distress when you didn't need to? And people are doing, they're buying the properties in companies and selling shares because, it is 0.5%, as Chris has said. And I also remember back in the day, they never asked you if you had properties in any other part of the world. So you would, if you do, so if you've inherited a property from your long lost grandmother somewhere in the world, you are not a first time buyer for the purposes of stamp duty. Which it's almost as if you're being penalized for wanting to get on the property market. So on the one hand, you're saying, yes, we want more people on there. But on the other hand, you're having rules like this, which prevents it. So it just, so contradictory.
It seemed to me, if I may posit, that when this latest shade of government got in place, that they were stating it was going to be more support for the common man and woman. And yet here we are, positively shoving people towards the direction of selling into a company and dealing with it via shares. Doesn't that fly in the very face of it?
It translates into what is more support, because it seems to be that whoever's definition of more support isn't what we as a nation need. So again, last week we discussed about the decision makers not having the input, not having the knowledge, to make these sorts of decisions. And that's happening all over again. As a lawyer, I see it. I mean, the amount of pressure, you talk about people leaving the profession. Honestly, this can have a knock-on effect on someone's mental health when it comes to someone saying, I'm going to sue you because I've lost the lower end of the stamp duty. And you do get those types of calls, irrespective of how many disclaimers you put on your email. So you're not just being a solicitor, but you're being a mediator. You're having to deal with potential problems in terms of your PI. It is too much. And you've got to look at the whole knock-on effect of a rule that you've made. And this is what happens here. They may argue, well, you had ample notice of this. Yes, but that's just not how the conveyancing process works. You know, I'm in Italy at the minute, and so one of the things is you go to a house, you see the house, you like the house, you put an offer in, the seller agrees, you go to a notarium, you sign. That's you send your money over. So if it's coming by mortgage or cash, that's it. It is buyer beware, because if you buy a house and there's issues, that's your problem. You've inherited that. But there's no kind of sort of red tape that happens in between. And that is one of those things where it's almost as if Britain is really draconian in its ways. I get that you want to have all of the information present, but we've got technology now where all of this should be available. I mean, you know, Hamish is seamless when it comes to providing searches. When I compare the service I get from his company in comparison to other companies, I think, what's happening here? You know, it's because he actually takes pride, and there's a personal level of service where the searches are pushed through very quickly and we get the results very quickly. But there's often a beef. Well, oh my goodness, you know, this search is taking 5 weeks. Okay, that might be beyond someone else's control. But there is this sort of sense of all of these different disjointed elements in a conveyancing transaction. You know, no one cares. The search provider doesn't care necessarily that there's a threshold coming up. Yet it ends up on the lawyer's lap at the end of the day that this hasn't happened. It's your fault. You know, you should make this happen. It's really important when it comes to managing expectations, because a house purchase is such a huge thing, especially in a first-time buyer's life. And the other thing is they don't necessarily understand the process. So for all you know, from the time they get a mortgage offer, they think, okay, it's in the bag because the bank will lend me the money. I don't need to do anything further.
Hamish, if you'd unmute yourself, sir, it seems to me that we buying a property, and rather than it being wrapped in a beautiful red ribbon, it seems to be wrapped in a beautiful bunch of red tape.
Well, I think we've got two aspects here, and I think one fundamental aspect, it seems to me that governments and the lockdown period just sort of emphasize this, that governments can impose anxiety on the populace at the drop of a hat by doing various things. And although we're speaking about a smaller proportion of everybody at some stage is going to have to either move or do something about the property, do something about the home where they're living. And it's more appropriate to people who are actually wanting to move at the moment. So it's not the whole of the society that's going to have anxiety imposed, but those who are thinking about moving this year, for example. So it's not just a short-term thing. It's what people were saving up to do. They can't afford it any longer. So that's put them completely out of the picture. Because now, yes, you could buy a property within the time frame that we have, but there is a challenge there. And as Juliet points out, you can never tell where that challenge is going to come from. So you've got the anxieties of people actually sort of moving, but you've also got, yet again, the government is interfering with a sector which is absolutely vital to the economy of this country. And every time anything's imposed on it, good, bad, or indifferent, there is an impact. There is a consequence of that. It's to do with economics. I mean, in life, it doesn't necessarily, but in economics, it does mean it. If you do this, somebody's going to respond in a particular way to actually either accommodate it or just avoid it completely. I mean, I would imagine, I don't know, but in Chris's example, there's obviously a potential there because people aren't actually going to be buying properties now because of the stamp duty. It may give more opportunity to the investors to actually do something about the social housing that Chris can actually sort of do. So that might be a positive because, as we say, there's sometimes a positive as well as a negative. There just seem to be too many ways that the government can impose not necessarily sanctions, but scenarios whereby the smooth running of such an important industry to this country is actually sort of being tossed backwards and forwards every month or so. In fact, it's almost every week or so, but, oh, we'll just do this or we'll just do that.
Well, it seems to be we are we are beset by something close to what could be called Newtonian economics, where every action seems to have an absolutely opposite reaction. Chris, does this represent potentially new business positive for you?
I think from an investment perspective, it's potentially a blip. But like I said, I don't see it as a tax on me as a buyer. I see it as a tax on a seller. So my offers
because it get passed on effectively.
Yeah. So I do think it's punitive, and I also do think it's a racket that's just been allowed to go on for such a long time, and then the fact that they've increased the rates. I mean, the tiers in the rates are just astronomical in the step ups already. So yeah, we're factoring all these numbers into our calculations, but just for one of our overseas clients, they're talking about paying up to 10 grand in tax on a 120, 150 grand house. It's like that's one hell of a sting. So there's some serious costs involved now with how far up the government has jacked the prices. So yeah, it's just looking at some of the financials now on some of the offers that are going out. It's like I'm wincing because I'm expecting the pushback.
Well, I mean, a lot of these kind of investment properties that people are taking on make between 10 and 20% profit over a period of a year or so. But if you're then having a 10% uplift in the amount it costs you because you're going to fork out extra tax, it's going to make you think twice before even investing in them, surely.
It slows it all down. Yes, that's a fact. Yeah, and if you push investors out of the market or to a point where their offers are no longer going to be accepted by sellers, or the offer prices where the numbers would be accepted as just not commercially viable for an investor or a developer, it's just another death nod to the industrious elements of the PRS, and it just opens the door to the big conglomerates that do have this pension money that they can just hoover up large swathes of the asset base at such a low percentage because they actually do need to park that capital. And then we're in a situation like we are like the Germans are, where everyone rents. All the property is owned by a small handful of these huge organisations, and it just restricts competition, restricts choice. Do you want to be in that position? Do you want to be owning your own home?
I think it's a terrifying position. We talk about individual freedoms. And part of that is freedom of choice. If you've got no choice, that isn't a freedom anymore. No, absolutely. Hamish, would you care to take us home, sir?
Well, we just have one other thing to sort of take into account when we look at what's going on within property. And I think from what we can actually sort of see, it is not making it any the simpler from the aspect that property lawyers are getting involved with, as Juliet sort of explained, and several contradictions. And the worst of it, I hadn't even thought about this, the fall through. Yes, we can afford it. All of a sudden, hey, look, we know they need another £5 grand. Where do you get £5,000 from? If that's what your tax bill is actually going to be increased by. So the fallouts are going to be increased as a consequence. And that doesn't help the smoothness. That doesn't help the smooth flow, increases anxiety, puts pressure unnecessarily on everybody. I think it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, the government hasn't thought it fully through as to what the impact actually was. It was almost one of the first things they said. Again, like it's never worked out, because we've had one of the worst winters going in goodness knows how long. They taken away the support that they give to the elderly, to retired, who really needed that money to support themselves. And at the same time, we did almost the same thing about now we're doing nothing about stamp duty. You haven't got it. Or basically, we're actually going to increase it and push it back up to. When you think about it, when that stamp duty was reduced several years ago now, as if you like a means to get people actually sort of moving and flowing with everything, house prices were significantly lower. So when you pull it away, you really should be pulling that ladder. You should be, the rungs should be much right. Sort of wider in terms of, hey, let's get underneath this. not very helpful at all. From
Well,
what we've
it
I
seems
hope
to be that they're moving the first rung of the ladder impossibly high, which is immediately going to disable large swathes of the young populace from ever getting on there. We're going to end up turning into generation rent, whether we like it or not. The old German model, as Chris mentioned. Oh, well. On that cheery note, thank you so much to my stalwarts, of course, Chris Gilsenan, Hamish McClay, my esteemed Lord and Master, and of course, Julet Baboolal of Gunner Cook. And to all of you watching, there is hope. May not be the end of this tunnel, but there is hope. Keep watching. We'll try and uncover it in our next exciting episode of Property Quorum. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Do look after that mental health. Goodbye.